All right, so you're here, which means you're ready to go deeper with resilience.
Deeper.
Yeah, beyond the basics. Like you're ready for that elite level stuff.
Okay, I like where this is going.
So in this deep dive, we're looking at this podcast episode called Elite Level Resilience.
Hmm?
Unfiltered insights on building an entrepreneurial mindset, tough enough to handle anything life throws your way.
That's a mouthful.
It is. But basically, it's all about getting real about resilience, like the grit and the tough emotions and turning those setbacks into something you can use.
Unfiltered insights, huh? That definitely suggests they're not sugarcoating anything.
Not at all. So to start off, how does this source actually define elite resilience? It's obviously not just about bouncing back from like everyday stuff.
Right. It goes way beyond just never give up. It's about facing those really tough challenges that really make you question everything.
So how do you actually do that? What does that even look like?
Well, they talk about this idea of realistic optimism. It's like acknowledging that, yeah, things can go wrong, but you still find a way to move forward.
So you're not ignoring the negative, but you're not letting it stop you either.
Exactly. They actually used this boxing analogy I thought was helpful. Like a boxer goes in with a plan, right? But then their opponent does something totally unexpected.
Ah, so they have to adapt.
Yeah, think on their feet. Use that new information and adjust.
I like that. So it's being realistic, but not letting that turn into, like, giving up.
And a big part of that is emotional agility, which they say is super important for entrepreneurs because, well, business is emotional.
Oh, absolutely. The highs and lows can be crazy. So how does emotional agility fit in? Is it about, like, suppressing those emotions?
Not at all. It's more about being able to handle them, especially when things get intense. Like, imagine driving a car down a winding road.
Okay, I can picture that.
If you're super tense, gripping the wheel too tight, you won't react smoothly to the curves. But being too relaxed and not paying attention is just as bad.
So you need that balance.
Exactly. And that balance comes from being present with your emotions, seeing them as information, not letting them totally take over. Like think of anger, frustration, even fear as signals, not dictators.
Okay. So like if you're feeling super scared, that's something to pay attention to, not something to just shut down.
Exactly. You're using that emotion to decide what to do next. Now, the source tied all of this to something we hear a lot about having a growth mindset.
Right. But how does that actually play into this elite resilience idea?
It's all about how you see challenges and setbacks. Someone with a growth mindset, they don't see failing as the end. It's more like valuable data. They learn from it and then use it to tackle the next challenge.
So it's like using those tough experiences to actually grow. You're not dwelling on the negative, you're using it to get stronger. Honestly, I can already see how these ideas could help me in my own life.
Me too. And get this, they actually share some specific strategies for building this kind of resilience. Want to hear about them?
For sure. Let's get into those strategies and see how we can actually use them.
Okay, so the first strategy is about reflection and reframing.
So not just like thinking about what went wrong, but looking at it differently.
Yeah, it's about taking those past mistakes and figuring out how to use them to succeed in the future. They even have this little reframing exercise. Like instead of just saying, well, I learned something, ask yourself, how can I use this next time?
I like that. It's like you're already looking ahead instead of dwelling on the past.
Right. You're being proactive, not reactive. And they really emphasized making this reflection thing a regular practice.
Like mental conditioning.
Exactly. You build that mental muscle by consistently reflecting and reframing. The next strategy is called emotional presence. Have you ever been so overwhelmed by emotions that you can't think straight?
Oh yeah, all the time, especially in my business. It can get pretty crazy.
Well, they suggest this thing called a mind reset.
Yeah.
You take like 5 minutes to just sit with those emotions, not fighting them, just noticing them.
Like hitting pause and just breathing.
Exactly. It's amazing how much clearer things can become when you do that. You're basically clearing the fog so you can deal with things in a calmer way.
I can see how that would be super helpful. Okay, what's the third strategy?
This one might seem obvious, but it's building a strong support network. Who do you turn to when things get rough?
My close friends and family, for sure. They're like my cheerleaders. But I also have a few mentors who I can always count on for honest feedback.
Perfect. You've got both people who cheer you on and people who give you that constructive criticism.
So you need both sides, huh? Support and honesty.
And they make a great point about how those real-life connections are way more valuable than the ones we make online.
Right. Likes on social media are nice, but they're not the same as a real conversation with someone who really gets you.
Exactly. Those
Yeah.
genuine relationships are so important, especially when you're struggling.
So we've got these three strategies: reflecting and reframing, being emotionally present, and having a strong support network. I'm already seeing how these could make a big difference. But how do you actually use these in real life, like when things get tough?
That's where their resilience response cycle comes in. It's like a framework for handling challenges, and it pulls in all those strategies.
Okay, tell me more. What's the first step?
First step is facing reality. Sounds simple, but it's often the hardest. You have to acknowledge the facts of the situation, even when they suck, but you don't let those facts define you.
So no burying your head in the sand, but also not letting it destroy you.
Right. You're creating that space between the problem and your sense of self. Like, let's say you're working on a big project and you hit a wall.
Ugh, I've been there. It's so easy to freak out.
Instead of panicking, you take a breath, acknowledge the problem, but you don't let it mean you're a failure.
So you're taking ownership, but not letting it crush you.
Exactly. Once you've faced reality, then you move into solution mode. This is where the action starts.
So you're not dwelling on the problem, you're figuring out what to do about it.
You start asking, what's one thing I can do to move forward? Maybe you break the problem down into smaller pieces or ask for help. The key is to go from being stuck to taking action.
Because taking action creates momentum, and momentum builds confidence. I see how that works.
And the last step in the cycle is learning from what happened. After you've dealt with the challenge, it's time to reflect and figure out what you learned.
Like asking, what went well? What could I have done differently? And how can I use this going forward?
They use this analogy of collecting armor. Each challenge makes you stronger for the next one.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's like turning those tough experiences into something positive.
And the more you practice this whole cycle, the more natural it becomes. It's like your go-to move for dealing with anything.
This is all making a lot of sense. But one thing I've always struggled with is dealing with criticism. It's so hard not to take it personally.
That's really common. They talked about this too. They said the key is discernment. Not all criticism is equal. Some is actually helpful, aimed at helping you improve, but some is just negative, probably coming from the other person's own issues.
So you have to figure out which kind it is.
Exactly. Ask yourself, is this person genuinely trying to help, or are they just being negative? If it's just negativity, you can let it go.
It's so easy to get caught up in those negative voices, especially when they're from people you care about.
It is, but you get to choose what you let affect you. And when it comes to constructive criticism, remember that growth mindset.
Because if you see it as a threat, you're just going to get defensive and miss the chance to learn.
So even if the feedback stings a little, try to focus on the message. What can you learn from it? How can you use it to get better?
It's like shifting the focus from defending yourself to trying to understand the other person's point of view.
And you don't have to agree with everything they say. Take what resonates with you and leave the rest.
This is really helpful. It could really change how I deal with criticism.
I think so too. You mentioned earlier how intense running a business can be. That's where emotional agility comes in. Remember that car analogy?
Yeah, like driving on a winding road, finding that balance.
Emotional agility is like that. It's about navigating the ups and downs without letting your emotions control you.
Because we all make decisions based on our emotions sometimes. And sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't.
Exactly. So how do we get better at this? They suggest a practice called mind reset. Basically, you're creating space between you and your emotions.
Okay, I'm listening. What is mind reset?
It's not about suppressing your emotions. It's about observing them without judging them. You're like a curious observer of what's happening inside you.
So when you're feeling overwhelmed, you just notice it. You're
Yeah.
present with it, but you don't let it make you do anything.
You notice what's happening in your body, the thoughts in your head, and you just breathe.
I like that. It's like acknowledging the feeling without letting it take over.
Yeah.
And then you can deal with things more calmly.
Being able to manage your emotions is huge when it comes to resilience. You're not letting your feelings control you anymore.
This has been really insightful. We've talked about facing reality, finding solutions, learning from experiences, dealing with criticism, and managing our emotions. I feel like I've got a whole new toolkit. But before we wrap up, they made a really important point. Resilience isn't something you're born with. It's a practice.
Totally. It's like going to the gym for your mind. You got to keep showing up and putting in the work.
And like with physical fitness, some days are better than others.
The key is to just keep practicing, keep learning, keep growing. The more you do, the more resilient you become, and that lets you achieve amazing things.
Okay, we've covered a lot, but there's one more super important part of elite resilience: having a strong support network. That's what we'll be getting into next. So we're back and ready to talk about support networks. I think they're essential for building real resilience.
Yeah, this is where it all comes together, taking those ideas and turning them into something you can actually use.
Because nobody can do it all alone, right? You can't handle everything by yourself.
Nope, we need each other. Humans are social creatures, after all.
And those connections, those relationships, become even more important when things are tough.
The source made a really interesting point. It's not enough to just have people around. You need the right kind of support. They talked about having cheerleaders, but also people who give you constructive criticism.
I like that. Because we need both, don't we? We need people who celebrate our wins.
Absolutely. They remind you of your strength when you're starting to doubt yourself. They help you see the good stuff, even when things feel bad.
But you also need people who'll be honest with you, even if it's hard to hear.
Exactly. They push you to grow, to be better, even if it's uncomfortable.
It's like having your own personal board of advisors. People who care about you, but won't just tell you what you want to hear.
So how do you actually build this kind of network? You have to be really intentional about the relationships you create.
So you think about the people you spend time with, making sure they fit with your values and goals.
Right. People who inspire you, challenge you, and make you want to be better. And it's not about how many people you know, it's the quality of those connections.
They talked about that too, the difference between online connections and the really genuine ones you build in person.
Think about it. Those likes on social media feel good for a minute, but it's not the same as talking to someone face to face, someone who understands you.
It's like a quick text versus a handwritten letter.
Exactly. You need those people you can actually call when you're struggling. Someone who'll just listen, no judgment, and give you advice or just be there for you emotionally.
That's who helps you stay strong when things are difficult, who reminds you that you're capable and helps you get back on track.
And those relationships, they take time and effort. You have to show up for people, be present, invest in those connections.
Be the kind of friend or colleague that you want to have in your own life.
And the more you put in, the stronger those relationships get, and the more resilient you'll be when you hit those challenges. Knowing you've got people you can count on, it makes a huge difference.
It's like having a safety net, knowing you're not alone.
So if you're feeling isolated, reach out. Connect with someone, a friend, family member, a colleague, maybe a mentor.
Find a group or community that shares your interests. Make the effort to build those real connections. It'll make you feel better and more resilient too.
Because having that support system, it makes all the difference when things get tough.
So I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today. We looked at the main ideas behind elite resilience, from facing facts to building that strong support network.
We impact some really good strategies like the resilience response cycle and things like that mind reset technique.
And the biggest takeaway is that resilience isn't something you're just born with. It's something you practice. It's a journey.
A journey anyone can take, with the right tools and mindset.
To wrap things up, we want to leave you with something to think about.
What's one challenge you're facing right now? Something that's been on your mind, testing your resilience.
And how could you use even just one part of the resilience response cycle to deal with it? Maybe facing reality, coming up with solutions, or seeing what you can learn?
You have the power to choose to be resilient. And you're strong enough to overcome anything. And you don't have to do it alone.
Keep learning, keep growing, and keep building your resilience. And reach out to those who support you.
Until next time, stay curious.